So I would, without much ado, immediately invite Mr. Balakrishnan to make his presentation.
Thank you, Professor Patnaik, and a very good morning to all of you. I hope you are all well rested in our beach resort and Kovalam. Today we are starting the session with the Kerala experience. Well, naturally we will be repeating many things that have been already said yesterday by many speakers, because parts of the points that we are covering today has already been covered, and it's quite natural that some cross-references may come up. The theme of my presentation is about having, are you getting the presentation on the, I can't see that. Oh. Good. The theme of my presentation is about open minds leading to opening the doors, and I will explain that later. As somebody said yesterday, I think it was Mr. Radhakrishnan, the chairman of the Jawaharlal Nehru Port Trust, who said yesterday that like the fashions change every 10 or 20 years, the economic theories and economic fashions and preferences also tend to change over a period of time, and in a cycle, some of these theories re-emerge packaged in new bottles or new forms. If you look at the 50s, there's been a fairly good balance between the public sector and the private sector in India. Some of the well-established companies which are functioning well even today were either created or were already in the field in those days. In the public sector, companies like BHEL, SAIL, ONGC, and in the private sector, Telco, it was now renamed as Tata Motors, Grasim, Larsen and Toubro. So there's a balance emerging between private and public sector in the early 50s. That started slowly changing with our new economic policies of assigning the commanding heads of the economies to the public sector, and it kept moving, and by 70s you could see there's a shift to the left, towards nationalization, towards state ownership, towards more public ownership, not only just in India, but I would say the many other parts of the world also. Greece, Olympic Airlines was nationalized. Greece, Olympic Airlines was nationalized, and India, 14 banks, very, I would say, major economic change in those days, I would say. 14 banks were nationalized. Coal, oil industries were also nationalized, and UK, British Gas, British Petroleum, even in United States, the railroads, some of them were taken over in those days. After 20 years, by 1990, the pendulum had shifted considerably to the right, and you would see privatization, globalization, liberalization coming to the forefront, almost totally discrediting the public sector, public ownership, and state-owned enterprises. And my story more or less starts from there, and probably at the end of the presentation, I will try to talk about where are we now. Well, today we are talking about what has happened in Kerala in the last, say, 4.5, 5 years, and how we were able to unlock the potential of the state-owned enterprises or the public sector. Just a word about Kerala. Many of you are familiar, but all the same I should say that this is the state where the Communist Party was elected to power through the ballots for the first time in the world in 1957. They have been in and out, but through probably this is the first instance of the Communist Party coming to power through the democratic process. Why I'm saying it now is that the state has a very strong, what is a support base for state ownership. Even when you go back much earlier to our legends and our myths, Kerala, we believe, has been ruled by this Emperor King Mahabali, whose motto was, and we keep singing that song every year, when the Mahabali was ruling, all the people were in India were, all the people in Kerala were almost same, similar in the sense there was perfect equality. We say in Malayalam, Manushar ellarum onnu pole. So there was perfect equality. So that the myth, the culture, that that sense of fairness is ingrained in the habit, in the culture, in the society for a long time. Therefore, you would probably see much more support for public sector in this land than probably in any other states in India and maybe in many other parts of the world. That's just by way of background. And to just give you some idea about the public sector, public-owned enterprises in Kerala, we have, this is the 2005 numbers, but today we have about 130 state-owned enterprises. That includes about 11 industrial cooperatives. For a state, and if you just compare it with the national average, or the size of our economy, or the size of our population, or the size of our land mass, we should be having something around 30 to 35 if we are taking the Indian average as a base. But we are far ahead of that. Of that, the manufacturing is about 63. I'm not going into the details. This is the picture generally. Well, we are now talking about the last 4.5 years, what has happened in Kerala, and how many of the loss-making, sick public enterprises were turned around. And these were the three important, I would say, the reasons or causes for that, and I would say the political will, the strong political will. The present party in power came to power in 2006, and we in the civil service knew the changes coming even before they came to the power, because the political manifesto of the party very clearly said, very openly and very clearly, that two sectors we are going to concentrate in the industry are reviving the traditional sector and restructuring and making the public sector viable. So it was public knowledge, we knew it was coming, and that it was not empty words were demonstrated, as I said yesterday in my presentation by Honorable Minister, because the very first thing he did when he took over as the minister was to start a series of consultations with various experts and experienced persons in the field of government, in public sector, in the banks, in the trade unions, and economists about how to revive the public sector units in Kerala and how to support the traditional sector in Kerala. And it was also clear from the way he picked up his team, because we saw that his personal staff, Mr. Shashidharan Nair, Mr. Dr. Gopakumar, and Mr. who is now left, the gentleman who is in Africa, what's his name? Janardhanan, Mr. Janardhanan. All these persons came with a strong public sector background. They came from the state-owned enterprises. There was only one person from the secretariat, Mr. Muralidharan Nair. All the other three had, demonstrated capabilities in state-owned enterprises. So that was another indication that his priorities, say 3/4 of his top personnel staff are coming from the state-owned enterprises, another indication. So the political will was demonstrated in not just in words, but the cabinet decisions, but in the cabinet meetings, in the ministers' speeches and all that. And then the frenzy of activities to revive that made it very clear that this is a very, very high priority area. And the government was not talking in the air, they also demonstrated it by the budget support. For example, in 2005-2006, the budget support for the industries, the state-owned enterprises, was only 50 million Indian rupees. That's a very small amount. The next year, that was increased to 550 million Indian rupees. That's about a 1,100% jump on the resource allocation. But by itself is not a very large amount. If you look at it, our total plan size, it's about 100,000 million Indian rupees, say about 10,000 crores, of which the, right sir? About that. And of which where the about 50 crores is only going for state-owned enterprises. It's not big. But what is very, very important is the huge jump from 5 million to 550 million. That sent the message very clearly, A. And B, it was very, very timely. Giving money is important. Giving it in time is more important. That's what happened in the case of state-owned enterprises. Just to compare that, if you look at the allocation for the traditional sector in Kerala, which includes cashew, handloom, coir, tiles, and all that, which is the other thrust area for the government, the allocation is something like about 3,000 million Indian rupees or 300 crores, almost, if you put everything plan and non-plan. So it shows that this, the money by itself is not huge. Why I'm saying is, many people are under the impression that the public sector in Kerala were turned about by massive infusion of funds from the state exchequer, which is not true. State exchequer did support, and there was a strong demonstrated will, and the money came on time. It's all true, but it's not huge money coming into that. It was the right amount of money coming at the right time with conditions, not it was free money. It came with a lot of conditions, lot of, pre-arranged performance parameters. Well, another important thing that contributed to the success of the state-owned enterprises was the general economic prosperity of India, the economic growth story of India. The economy grew during this period by about 9.5%, touching almost 10%. Even when we had the recession in 2008 and when the many other developed economies sank, in India we were growing at about 6.7%, which was very good. So these last 4-5 years, we saw very high growth of economy at the national level and also at the state level, which resulted in growth in infrastructure, growth in demand, growth in consumer goods, pushing up the general, profitability of all organizations across the sector. That included the traditional sector, that included the private sector, it included the public sector. So public sector also benefited by this economic boom that was happening in India, the unprecedented boom, because we are accustomed to a growth rate of 2.5%, which slowly grew to 3.5%, and it was growing at 8-9%. It did have a very positive effect on the whole economy, and the state-owned enterprises also benefited by this growth in the economy. And what did we do? And there are two things which we tried very successfully. One was, as against the traditional practice of either closing down the sick company or privatizing that, we went for a third alternative of tying up with the central public sector undertakings. Not very healthy state-owned enterprises were tied up with the strong central public sector companies. The Navaratna company, NTPC, came to rescue TELC. The Maharatna company, SAIL, Steel Industries, Steel Authority of India Limited, tied up with the Steel Complex Kerala. And we had BHEL, we had railways coming in. That's the only one which has not fully materialized. But in many areas, central public sector undertakings and state undertakings were joined together to form joint venture. This was a new experience which we tried. Probably may not be relevant to many other countries because they are talking about federally owned enterprises. The second one is the role of the organization REAB, where a lot of professionals were taken. They went into various aspects of management of the public enterprises. They identified the weakness and they continued to sort of nurse them back to health, especially the monthly monitoring chaired by the Honorable Minister, where each parameters were analyzed in depth and answers were found. That was a very key area as far as the success of the PSUs were concerned. The government also came out with a general sale tax amnesty scheme, where there were areas, but it was not only for public sector, it was available for private sector also. And once we had nursed the companies back to health, we started investing the surplus in new factories and companies in public sector itself. This is the tie-up I was talking about, Telc and TPC, the modernized plant of TCC, the new textile mill that we have opened. Well, we are coming back to the role of rehab, where performance management, the professionals started setting targets, monitoring that, benchmarking with the best run companies, not just in public sector, but in private sector, not just in India, the best in the world. So we started benchmarking even the small companies with the best in the world, and that was the ideal they were given. They should be competing with them. They should be working on par with them. And monitoring system, online monitoring system, and most important one, that when the minister was sitting himself every month reviewing the progress and looking at their weakness and supporting them with both budget and also by the government policies, that had a tremendous effect on the morale of the state-owned enterprises. Of course, we also recognize the achievers. The annual conferences, some of the managing directors getting rewarded. And also, we focused on areas of professionalization, capacity building. The boards were professionalized. The CEOs were selected through a very transparent system based on qualification and experience. And succession plans were introduced in the companies, and continuous training from the lowest level to the highest level were introduced. For enhancing the productivity, we worked with the trade unions and set new targets in cooperation with them, enhance the remuneration, because many of the state-owned enterprises were sick, and the employees, some of them were not even getting salary, and some of them were not getting the salary which they deserve. And many of them were also complaining that their wage revisions have not come in time. So we tried to solve all that, not at a go, but in stages, and most of these have been now brought on par with the private sector. And naturally, that also resulted in the overall economic development also played a role in this. Well, we improved our auditing system, which Mr. Padma Kumar will be talking in detail in the rest, so I will not go into it. Again, the basic point is that we focused on professional management and performance parameters. The surplus available in in the form of land and buildings were reused for, again, reviving the state-owned enterprises. We also created with the first years we were focusing on reopening some of the closed down units. Then we were focusing mostly on bringing them back to health. And after we are done that, we started investing the surpluses of the funds created by these PSUs in the state-owned enterprises itself. These are some of the new projects which we have launched this year and which we will be commissioning this year itself. Not very big project, but the most important message here is that the state is not withdrawing from the industrial field. It's re-entering with a vengeance, I would say. We are coming back as a serious player in the economic field, and the state, we believe, has a role to play in the economic field also. Apart from the governance, apart from administration, in the economic field also, in the commercial field also, the state has a role to play, not necessarily in every industry or every commercial activity, but it does have a role to play, and that's the message we are giving by reinvesting and starting new industries at a time when more and more public sector state-owned enterprises are withdrawing and leaving the field to the private sector. Some more companies which we have set up, which we will be commissioning by next month, by January. And also some of the existing companies were expanding, again using the funds generated by these companies. I was talking about the public support in here. What we have found over the years is that generally the state supports state ownership. And the most unpopular act or the most unpopular thing in the state is privatization or pushing converting state-owned enterprises into private sector. We have seen that in the media, we have seen that in the meetings, we have seen in the informal discussions of the public. The state ownership is something which is accepted in the society, which is encouraged, and which is people would like to sort of work for that. And the example I remember was that when we reopened this Malabar Spinning and Weaving Mills, this was a company which was closed down and liquidated almost. Then when this new government came, they revived that. And when this factory was reopened with an old siren which has not been making noise for years together, the whole town came there as if it was a public holiday, as it was a big celebration, like it was a Christmas or Onam. The whole town came to celebrate the reopening of the mill, showing the joy and the enthusiasm for the state companies. It's not a huge company. It has not been impacting the whole town. It was a very small company in a mid-sized town, but the emotional attachment of the people to that company was, it's almost like a family reunion, one could see that. I remember that. And these were, again, Trivandrum Spinning Mill was also another company which was closed down, which was reopened. Kerala Soaps was also a company which was closed down, but again reopened. So these were the companies which were let go, but we again revived them, and new factories and buildings with that, they are now back in the market. Well, apart from the support to the state-owned enterprises, the government also has been supporting heavily the traditional sector, and I talked about the budgetary allocation as against something like 500 million rupees going to state-owned enterprises, something like almost 3,000 million Indian rupees, 300 crores is going to traditional sector. And Madam here sitting is a great champion of the cashew sector, where a lot of women are employed, and Professor Patnaik is a champion of the handloom and coir and other sector. And there are literally hundreds of thousands of families depending upon this sector. And by infusing funds, we are giving them better technology, better market access, better managerial support, and these are now showing tremendous contribution to the economy. Otherwise, all these families will be seeking dole from government, because it's little difficult for us to retrain people who are in the late 40s and 50s and all that. But by giving them and keeping them employed, I would say usefully employed, gainfully employed, and they are making a contribution to the society and to the companies, things have changed dramatically in the rural sectors. Support includes in the bamboo sectors, khadi and handloom, and also to the coir, cashew, and similar sectors. We also have in order to reposition Kerala as a commercial destination, we have another program called Grand Kerala Shopping Festival. Every such program, we link it with either the traditional sector or the PSUs. How we have been doing that is, many of the products which we give away during these festivals, apart from the gold, are traditional products. We give away large number of coir products, cashew, handloom products. We tie up joint promotion of these traditional products with this shopping festival. We conduct various exhibitions and sale, what we call melas in India. In Kannur, we have the handloom mela. In Malappuram, we have the crafts mela. In Calicut, we have Bepur festival. Well, all these are put together. Then we have another cashew festival in Koilon, coir festival in Alapi, khadi silk festival in Trivandrum, spices festival in Idiki. So all these traditional products are brought back to the market, to the attention of the tourists, to the attention of the shoppers and consumers during this festival. So we use all these new programs to revive, support, and encourage both state-owned enterprises and traditional sector. Well, this is what we have been doing, and the result is for everybody to see. In 2005-2006, of the 43 manufacturing companies under us, only 12 were making profit, the rest were all losing. And we have done some more consolidation. I did talk to you about the large number of public enterprises. What we are trying to do is to reduce their number by merging companies which are doing similar business or which are in the same area, so that they will have a strong financial base, so that they can hire professionals paying market wages, and they also can invest in research, development, and marketing. So we are trying to reduce the number from the existing, say, 130, of which the manufacturing are 43. We will be happy if we can bring down the number. We have brought it down from 43 to 41. We will be happy to bring it down to about 10. But 10 viable large companies. It's not the numbers that is important, but their turnover, the manpower they are employing, their economic strength, and their ability to go beyond the borders of Kerala. That's we are now focusing on. Well, finally, as against a loss of minus 69.49 crores, that's about close to about 700 million Indian rupees. We have now a profit of about 239.75 Indian crores rupees. That's the change, and this is going to improve much further this year. In all probability, the indications are that all 41 companies will be making profit this year. We are working on that. Well, this is just putting that in the tabular form, that's all. Our success is also being noticed by many others. This is the Cabinet Secretary speaking from Delhi, who was here earlier as the Industry Secretary. He has seen it and he has been a part of the process. He was his words of encouragement on that. Well, to look back now, we once believed, at least in the early 90s, many people in the world believed or made to believe that privatization is the panacea for all ills of the society, of the business. But it hasn't worked that way, as many other speakers talked about yesterday. Is public sector gaining attention again, gaining importance? I would think so, because we have been able to, at least in this small state, able to get much more public support for the public enterprises than was the case before. And also, when the public enterprises improved their performance, it also positively affected the private enterprises, especially the small and medium industries. Because many of the small and medium industries, in Kerala at least, were partially or fully dependent on public enterprises for their orders in some way or the other. Either they were supplying to them or were receiving supplies from them. And so we found out, some of the chemical industries were supplying to a large number of manufacturing units there. Vice versa, they were also supplying. So the revival also supported the private sector, but other large private sector companies also did extremely well in Kerala during that period. A point which I made earlier, that the overall economic growth also helped the public sector. It was a mutual thing. When the economy was growing, say companies like KMML, they are mainly dependent on the paint industry. When the car industry boomed, when the construction boomed, demand for paint grew, demand for KMML products grew. Same with the Malabar Cements, another profit-making company. The construction boom really helped them. Talc, the boom in electrical sector helped them also. The boom in the, say, hospitality sector and health services created more demand for the services of the KSIDC, so their profits also went up. So we could see the economic growth helped both ways. The public sector revival helped the economy to grow further. The economic growth also helped the public sector to grow. So it was mutual. That's what we were seeing there. And today, now we are talking about 2010. We talked about the changes, which is almost coming every 20 years or so. Again, there's a balance as in the 50s coming up. We realize that public sector has a place in the society. Private sector has also a place in the society. I think experience now show that both can also coexist. One need not displace the another. There is probably sufficient room if the economy is kept growing, and if you are able to avoid the recessions, we should be able to sort of balance the growth. Again, before I conclude, I would like to say that, every state, every country has to go through its own methods, its own experience, but some process may be common, but everything will not be, there's no one size fit all program, because the Kerala's experience may not be easily transferable elsewhere. Well, yesterday I think it was Professor Gillibrand who was comparing China, in a way differently, China and Russia. If you look at that, he was telling that from 1917 till 1991, there's nobody with any managerial expert in private sector or market orientation in Russia. 3, 4, 5 generations have almost gone without knowing how does a market function. I remember a professor telling us the story in Russia about a market management class. The professor is saying, all the bakers are increasing the price of the bread. What do you do? Here comes a handset. Well, shoot down 5, 6 of them, the prices will go down. Well, that's one way of doing that. Another way of doing is probably increase the bread supply. That changes many have not realized in, markets. China was different. China became communist only in 1949, and many of those Chinese who were already doing business went into countries like maybe Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, where they prospered. They were in touch with home, and when the opportunity came, they were in a position to come back, reinvest, and support growth in China. And even China probably lost maybe one generation or so, and not like the Soviet Union. So every country has got different experience, and Kerala also has a different experience, and that's probably the lessons that we have learned. Some of them will be relevant, but I'm sure every country will have to go through their history, their culture, and their background before coming out with a prescription which is acceptable to the society. Well, what are we going to do in the years to come? We believe that the public sector should be competitive. It should not be standing on the crutches of the government. It should not be looking towards government support forever. It should be competitive. It should be competing on equal foot with the private sector. And we need to institutionalize. Many of the reforms that we have done is like putting somebody to the first to the intensive care unit. And many of the state-owned enterprises were in intensive care unit. And then we moved them from intensive care unit to the special ward, where you can give them much more attention. And that's what the Honorable Minister and the officers were doing by monitoring them on a monthly basis, spending a lot of time, energy, and resources on their revival. But this is not a sustainable model. After they are nursed back to health, it should be institutionalized, and they should be able to stand on their own. And as somebody spoke, I think it was Mr. Altanen who spoke yesterday, the challenge is how to monitor without actually interfering in the day-to-day functioning of the state-owned enterprises. That's the challenge we will have to answer in the days to come, and we have now institutionalized that partly by making the selection of the chief executives very transparent, by delegating more powers, thereby avoiding the interference of the bureaucrats and political executive to an extent, by delegating more powers to the boards and the PSUs, and empowering board, as I said earlier. And of course, we haven't yet done it, but we are working on incentivizing the management also. We have incentivized the workers in many of these companies, but an incentive system to the management will also have to be adopted. Accountability need to be improved without actually going into day-to-day, interfering in day-to-day management. And most important, when I think somebody was talking about the European experience and especially Swedish experience, it's very relevant for us, because if you look at the corruption index, India is very, very low, something which we are ashamed of. But in India, Kerala is probably the least corrupt state by all other indications. But what the Scandinavian countries are at the very, very top. So for them, that's not an issue. But for us, corruption in public life is a major issue. That is something which we shouldn't be pushing under the carpet. We should take it head on, and we should make the state-owned enterprises clean, and there should not be any room for allegations in the functioning of that. And how the idea is not to catch somebody after somebody has committed a mischief or a crime, but to prevent that. big challenges before us, which some other countries like Singapore have done very, very successfully. I'm sure we should also be able to do that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. That brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you.
I think because of an oversight, Sri K. N. Ravindranath, who is one of the discussants, has not been called to the dais. I'd request him to come over here. He's an outstanding trade unionist, currently president of the Kerala State Unit of the Center for Indian Trade Unions, and he has been a political activist from his school days, having participated in the independence movement. He leads a number of trade unions in major industries like MRF, Apollo Tyres, HMT, and FACT. Mr. Ravindranath. I'd now request Professor C.P. Chandrasekhar, my colleague at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. He's currently the chair